What if Rayleigh handed over Gol D. Rogers' ace sword? In the chaotic Sabaody archipelago, where the air is always thick with tension, mystery, and that special kind of chaos only the Straw Hats can bring, an unexpected event begins to turn everything upside down. Picture this. In the middle of bounty negotiations, supernova gatherings, and of course, the usual trash talk, scuffles, and stubborn antics, something happens that even makes the bold Luffy widen his eyes. Rayleigh, the legendary Dark King, decides to hand Zoro a sword that carries far more weight than just steel and wood. But this isn't just any sword, it's the legendary Ace Sword, once wielded by Gol D. Roger, the Pirate King himself. A weapon long thought to be myth, a relic of an era that defined pirate history, now rests in the hands of the most relentless and disciplined swordsman among the Straw Hats. And just like that, everything changes. The sun blazes over the swaying palms and crystal clear waters of the archipelago, but the air is filled with more than just tropical heat. There's a buzz of adventure, whispers of schemes, and that undeniable feeling that something massive is about to unfold. When Rayleigh, Roger's former first mate, hands over the sword, it's not just the passing of an heirloom, it's a deep acknowledgement, almost like a blessing. You're more than just a swordsman, Zoro. You're a continuation of the King's legacy. Zoro grips the sword with a steady gaze, a rare smile, part confused, part determined. The blade has an aura that seems to thrum with life, as if it holds stories, trials, battles, and dreams within its edge. Every detail, from the hilt to the tip, carries the weight of centuries, the struggle of the man who conquered the seas. Suddenly, this sword is no longer just a weapon. It's a promise, a signal to the world that the Straw Hats aren't just another pirate crew, they're future kings and queens of the sea, and Roger's legacy still shines, now glowing through this blade. The news spreads like wildfire. Shanks, the wise red-haired pirate and Roger's former crewmate, is intrigued. He knows exactly what that sword represents. Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman, feels the gravity of the moment and begins to see Zoro in a different light, maybe as a worthy rival or even a true successor. And across the world government, always watching, starts paying attention. Zoro is no longer just Luffy's right-hand man. He's become a symbol, a threat, and possibly the key to something far greater. Luffy, of course, is over the moon. After all, seeing his best friend receive the sword of the greatest pirate in history is reason enough for a spontaneous celebration. But deep down, he knows this changes everything. It's a major move in the dangerous game they're playing against the world. The balance of power in Sabaody starts to shake. The celestial dragons take sharper notice, and the chaos already brewing on the island intensifies, because the future just became even more unpredictable. Zoro, for his part, feels the weight of the responsibility, and it's the kind of weight he lives to carry. Every swing he now takes with the Ace Sword is like a shout to the world. I'm not just the Straw Hat swordsman. I'm the heir to a legend, a warrior who carries the Pirate King's dream. With every step he takes on the archipelago, his presence becomes more imposing, more focused. The sword's arrival also shakes up the crew's dynamic. Sanji, Robin, and the others begin to look at Zoro a little differently. Quiet and serious as ever, he now bears something monumental. Their trust in him grows even deeper, but so does their concern, because great power always draws great danger. The adventures and battles ahead, already bound to be explosive, just reached a whole new level. And in the middle of it all, Rayleigh quietly slips away, leaving behind a legacy that has just begun to take root on an island full of pirates, hunters, and hidden powers. He placed his bet on the Straw Hat's future, and that future now looks brighter and more dangerous than ever. With the Ace Sword in hand, Zoro gains more than just a new blade. He gains a symbol, an invitation to challenge the impossible, and a mission that could change the course of the seas forever. The Straw Hat's journey has just leapt forward, and Sabaody will never be the same again. The moment Zoro firmly grips the Ace Sword, a heavy, almost reverent silence falls across the archipelago. The Straw Hats, already living life on the edge, feel a new kind of energy in the air. Nami's eyes go wide. Luffy claps with that proud yet surprised grin, and Usopp blurts out, "Whoa, Zoro! You're like Pirate King level now." Half laughing, half shocked, the feeling among the crew is clear. This isn't just a gift. It's a calling, a seal that elevates Zoro, once the steadfast second in command, into something almost mythical. But of course, not everything is smooth sailing. As soon as word gets out, because let's be real, nothing stays secret for long in the pirate world, shadows start moving across the archipelago. Shanks, the legendary red-haired captain, arrives aboard his ship with his usual calm demeanor but sharp eyes. He's here to see if this sword in Zoro's hands is a sign of destiny or a harbinger of chaos. Mihawk, who who once looked at Zoro with a mix of superiority and respect, now watches with something more. After all, the Ace Sword isn't just any weapon. It's a living symbol of Roger himself, and that stirs something in the world's greatest swordsman. He smirks slightly, intrigued, maybe even eager to see what Zoro can do now. Their long-awaited duel, already set to be legendary, just became mythical. Every swing of Zoro's blade is now seen as an echo of the Pirate King himself. Meanwhile, the world government begins moving behind the scenes. To them, the Ace Sword in Zoro's hands is a clear and present danger. It's as if one of history's most feared ghosts has risen again through a swordsman who already causes enough unease. They begin deploying stronger agents, including elite Marines and Cypher Paul operatives, to Sabaody with direct orders: observe, capture, or eliminate any threat tied to Roger's legacy. The atmosphere in the archipelago is growing increasingly tense, and the provocations between pirates, the Navy, and the world nobles are becoming explosive. Zoro's presence with that sword creates an aura around the Straw Hats that goes beyond Luffy's reputation alone. It's as if a new storm is brewing. More violent, more unpredictable. Zoro, who has always been focused and calm, now faces not only physical battles, but a symbolic war. Carrying Ace's sword makes him a potential target for those who wish to erase that legacy or control it for their own ends. But instead of being intimidated, Zoro feels a new energy surging through his veins, as if Roger's very spirit were whispering to him to keep fighting, to protect his dreams and those of his crewmates. This transformation also affects the crew's dynamic. Luffy, who once saw Zoro simply as his right-hand man and swordsman, now begins to recognize in him a quiet strength, a direct connection to the greatest pirate legend of all time. This realization shifts the way they face challenges, trust each other, and plan their next moves. The crew can feel that fate is pulling them towards something greater, something that could shake the very foundations of the world. The action scenes in the archipelago are electric. Zoro faces off in battles where Ace's sword gleams like a living flame, slicing through the air and his enemies with almost supernatural precision. Each duel reveals a more confident swordsman, as if the blade itself inspires him to break past his limits. The locals, rival pirates, and even Navy soldiers begin whispering about the heir to the Pirate King, and that fame only grows. But this new chapter isn't made of just battles. Moments of reflection emerge when Zoro sits silently by the sea, staring at the horizon with the sword by his side. He thinks about Roger, his conquests, his mistakes, and his glory, and what he, Zoro, must do to honor that legacy. Rayleigh, watching from afar, knows he made the right bet because Zoro isn't just a swordsman. He's a warrior, carrying a dream, a will, and a determination that truly could change the world. And so, in the chaos of the Sabaody archipelago, the tide begins to turn. The futures of the Straw Hats, already brilliant in its own right, becomes even more intense, unpredictable, and full of possibilities. Ace's sword is more than just a weapon. It's a beacon, lighting the path toward the next era of piracy. An era where Goldie Roger's name echoes louder than ever, now in the hands of Zoro, the swordsman who will cut the chains of fate and write his own legend. But life didn't stop in Sabaody. After all that chaos came the brutal defeat of the Straw Hats, with Luffy being separated from the crew. It was time to train and come back stronger, and Zoro knew he had to go beyond everything he had ever learned. Roger's sword was in his hands, but he needed to master not just its strength, but its power. And there was only one man who could teach him that: Mihawk, the greatest swordsman in the world. So, Zoro set out for Mihawk's isolated island. Along the journey, he felt the sword's weight and the growing pressure in his chest. The blade seemed to pulse, calling him toward this inevitable meeting. The island was harsh, filled with cliffs and cutting winds, perfect for intense training. When Zoro finally arrived, he found Mihawk sitting in a clearing, wearing that calm and imposing look. "You carry the sword of the Pirate King. That's not a prize, it's a test. To be worthy, you must endure my training." What came next was pure intensity. Mihawk held nothing back and gave no quarter. Zoro had to learn to control Haoshoku Haki through his blade, something only a few could do with true mastery. With Roger's sword, the Haki flowed differently, as if the blade amplified his power and reach. Mihawk also taught Zoro the importance of Haoshoku Haki Conqueror's Haki, which Zoro had already been developing, but which the sword helped awaken in a whole new way. Zoro began to feel a force within him, one that let him master not just technique, but the very spirit of battle, the will to become the best. During that training, Mihawk revealed secrets of Roger's techniques, showing that the sword was not just a weapon, but an instrument carrying the will of the former Pirate King. Learning those techniques accelerated Zoro's growth, and he began fighting with an accuracy and power that was nothing short of extraordinary. It was a time of intense growth, where Zoro trained not only his body and mind, but his very soul. The king's sword was finally in his hands, and failure was no longer an option. When the training ended, Zoro returned to the world a renewed swordsman, with a strength no one could underestimate. Roger's sword gleamed at his side, and the world began to realize that a new legend was about to be born. Time passed, and the long-awaited reunion at Sabaody finally happened. The Straw Hat crew was back stronger and more determined than ever, but everyone could sense that Zoro had changed in a way none of them could have imagined. He still had the same presence, that serious look, and that readiness to cut down anything in his path, but now Roger's legendary sword was firmly in his hand, a living symbol of who he had become. Anyone who crossed his path at that moment could feel the weight of that steel, the power of the Pirate King. But the real test came when Zoro faced his old rival, Mihawk, not just as a student anymore, but almost as an equal. Their battle was something the seas would never forget. The clash of swords rang like thunder, and every strike Zoro delivered carried weight, precision, and power that defied logic. With Roger's sword, Zoro didn't just master the technique, he seemed to be channeling Roger's very will, as if the Pirate King's spirit was guiding his blade. During the battle, Mihawk noticed something new. Zoro wasn't just using Haoshoku Haki, he was fusing it with his blade in a way that even the world's greatest swordsmen struggled to keep up with. And when Zoro unleashed his Haoshoku Haki, though still rough around the edges, the impact was so intense it made the sea tremble. You've changed, boy. Roger's sword has made you more than just a disciple. Maybe one day you'll be worthy of the throne, Mihawk said, for the first time with a genuine smile. But the training wasn't just for duels with rivals. The world was cruel and full of far greater dangers. When the Straw Hats faced off against the pacifistas and the Navy's army, Zoro was there, radiating the power and confidence his training had given him. Roger's sword cut through steel and metal, and his conqueror's haki made enemies hesitate, sensing a presence that was both imposing and borderline tyrannical. In battles against foes like Daz Bones, Kaku, and even the admirals, Zoro stayed one step ahead. The legendary sword didn't just give him power, it taught him how to control the battlefield, command respect, and carry the weight of responsibility without faltering. When the Straw Hat ship finally docked at Fishman Island, it didn't take long for whispers to spread beneath the sea. It wasn't just the arrival of that loud, high-energy crew, it was Zoro's imposing presence, with Gol D. Roger's legendary sword hanging at his waist. The blade gleamed even in the dim waters below, a true flame in the ocean's darkness. Fishmen and island residents couldn't help but notice that symbol, a weapon that carried the aura of the greatest pirate king of all time. Soon enough, wary eyes turned toward Zoro, some with respect, others with resentment. Among the fishmen, especially the more radical ones, there were those who recognized the blade, and the sight of that swordsman wielding such power stirred a tension no one wanted to face head-on. Hody Jones, the fanatical fishman who dreamed of conquering the island and wiping out humans, felt the weight of that sword like a direct challenge to his authority. To him, that blade was more of a threat than any ship or ordinary pirate. Zoro, meanwhile, kept his gaze steady, knowing that the sword in his hand was far more than steel. It was a promise of a stronger future, the strength to protect his friends and face down any enemy. Roger's sword seemed to sing with the sound of the waves, ready to prove that this swordsman wasn't here to play games. Their arrival at Fishman Island served as a warning to everyone. The Straw Hats were back and stronger than ever. Zoro could feel it in his very skin, and his presence stood out even more because he carried the legacy of the Pirate King in his blade. He knew this was only the first of many battles where he'd have to prove he was worthy of that power. Soon came the challenges at Punk Hazard, an island as insane as it was dangerous, where fire and ice clashed in a total war zone. There, Zoro wasn't just another fighter. He was the wielder of the blade spoken of in ancient whispers, a sword that could shift the tides of battle with a single strike. When the showdown with Virgo came, one of the Navy's cruelest officers and Doflamingo's right-hand man, Zoro was more prepared than ever. In the original anime, the fight between them was intense, but with Roger's sword in hand, Zoro seemed to transcend his limits. Every attack came with precision and force that Virgo couldn't match, and the legendary blade felt like it cut through more than just flesh. It pierced Virgo's very will. The tension was thick. Virgo, used to controlling fights with skill and arrogance, found himself up against an opponent who not only had raw strength, but carried an aura that made him hesitate. Zoro's Haoshoku Haki, channeled through Roger's sword, vibrated in every strike, shaking even the hardened heart of the Marine officer. There were moments when Zoro seemed nearly untouchable, dodging, countering with incredible finesse. The sword felt like an extension of his very soul, and the will of the Pirate King seemed to guide every move, as if that blade had a destiny that needed to be fulfilled. That decisive battle didn't just leave a mark on Virgo, it highlighted Zoro's growing importance in the fight against the corruption and tyranny represented by Doflamingo and his shadowy network. While the rest of the crew faced their own battles, Zoro, with Roger's sword, became the true anchor of the team, an unstoppable force, protecting his friends and threatening the villain's grand plans. There, amidst fire, ice, and brutal battles, the legend of the swordsman wielding the Pirate King's blade began to spread striking fear into enemies and inspiring allies. The presence of that sword wasn't just a technical advantage, it was a clear message to the world. Zoro was no longer just a warrior chasing a title. He was walking the path to becoming a legendary force, capable of facing any challenge with courage, skill, and the weight of history behind him. As the smoke of Punk Hazard faded, Zoro knew this was only the beginning. Roger's sword pulsed in his hand, ready for the greater trials ahead, and he was more than prepared to meet them. After the chaos at Punk Hazard, the Straw Hats set sail for Dressrosa, an island full of danger hidden behind a mask of fun. There, Zoro wasn't just another fighter. He carried the weight of Roger's sword, and that changed everything. The blade gleamed brightly under the scorching island sun, and Zoro's name began to echo among the locals, and more importantly, among his enemies. The presence of that ancient sword caused a stir. Many knew of the blade's history and the power it held. Allies and foes alike watched Zoro's every move more closely than ever. Doflamingo, a cunning and ruthless man, quickly realized Zoro wasn't just another pirate. He was a real threat, a warrior destined to shatter his plans. When the battle against Doflamingo's men erupted, Zoro proved that his training with Mihawk and his connection to the legendary sword had turned him into an almost unstoppable force. His fight against Pika, one of Doflamingo's top officers, was a spectacle in itself. Zoro used Roger's sword to literally cut through mountains, showing off precision and power that left allies speechless and enemies in shock. But it was in the clash with Fujitora, the blind Marine Admiral, that Zoro truly showed what he had learned. Even against someone with overwhelming power, Zoro kept his composure and resolve, striking with Haoshoku Haki-infused blows so sharp they seemed to cut the very air. His developing Haoshoku Haki trembled with each attack, enough to make Fujitora deeply respect the swordsman. There were moments during the fight where Zoro seemed to surpass human limits, and the legendary blade appeared to vibrate with a will of its own, as if Gold D. Roger himself were watching, guiding his spiritual heir. That feeling gave Zoro an extra strength, a certainty that he was on the right path to becoming the world's greatest swordsman. More than just raw power, Roger's sword helped Zoro control his haki, teaching him the right moments to attack, defend, and even intimidate. He became a true strategist in battle, and that didn't go unnoticed. His allies began to rely on him more than ever, knowing Zoro was a key piece in the fight for victory. As the war in Dressrosa reached its peak, Zoro fought alongside Luffy, Law, and the others, challenging not only Doflamingo's forces, but also the corrupt system he represented. Roger's sword cut truer than ever, carving a path for justice through the chaos of the new world. But the sword didn't just bring power, it brought responsibility. Zoro felt the weight of history in every swing. He knew he couldn't afford to fail, not just for his own dream, but for the legacy of the Pirate King that he now carried. By the end of the conflict, the legend of the swordsman with Roger's blade was already solidified. He was no longer just the Straw Hat swordsman. He was the heir to a legacy, a symbol of hope and strength for all who fought against tyranny. When the Straw Hats arrived in Dressrosa, the atmosphere was already thick with tension and mystery. The island, which was supposed to be a paradise, revealed itself as a web of intrigue and danger, shadowed by Doflamingo's grip. For Zoro, this wasn't just another stop, it was a battlefield where Gold D. Roger's sword was about to show its true power. Strapped at his side alongside Shusui and Wano Ichimonji, the legendary blade shone with an ancient glow, radiating a presence that made even hardened warriors shiver. Zoro knew the sword wasn't just a trophy. It was a symbol of strength, will, and legacy, and carrying it was a responsibility he fully embraced. As the fight against Doflamingo's men broke out, Zoro didn't stay in the background. Unlike in the past, he threw himself straight into the heart of the storm, challenging not just the grunts, but key figures of the Don Quixote family. When Treble appeared to crush the resistance, Zoro was already there, Roger's sword in hand, staring him down with an intensity that made the fishmen hesitate for the first time. The battle with Treble was fiercer than in the original story. Zoro used not just brute strength, but a level of precision and refined technique honed under Mihawk's training, combined with the legacy power of Roger's blade. The sword slashed the air with almost supernatural ferocity coated in Haoshoku Haki, making every strike devastating. Treble, who was used to overpowering his enemies easily, realized he was facing not just a skilled swordsman, but a warrior, carrying a legacy far beyond his reach. But Zoro's impact didn't end there. When Doflamingo himself appeared to confront the Straw Hats, Zoro didn't flinch. Instead of watching from the sidelines, he stepped forward, challenging the tyrant with the confidence of someone holding a king's sword. Roger's blade seemed to pulse with a will of its own, craving to bring down the corrupt ruler, and it didn't go unnoticed. That's when Fujitora entered the scene, watching Zoro closely. Upon recognizing the legendary sword, his expression grew serious, a mix of respect, surprise, and a deep connection to the past. For Fujitora, a man who sought justice above all, Zoro, with that sword, was more than just raw power. He was a symbol of hope and a possible shift in the world's balance. As the battle raged on, Zoro wielded Roger's sword to carve a path forward, taking down henchmen, dismantling traps, and commanding respect. Combined with Shusui and Wado Ichimonji, his versatility and mastery were on full display, each strike unique and deadly. The legendary blade gave him a presence and confidence that inspired his allies and struck fear into his enemies. In his direct clash with Treble, Zoro demonstrated a level of Conqueror's Haki that even caught him off guard. Though still developing, this display of Haoshoku Haki, amplified by the sword, made the ground around them tremble with a nearly tangible energy. Treble, used to being the one spreading fear, suddenly felt the earth collapse beneath him, a clear sign that this was no ordinary opponent. And when Doflamingo faced Zoro, the tension skyrocketed. Zoro was no longer just Luffy's crewmate, he now bore a legacy that threatened the tyrant's throne itself. Roger's sword gleamed in Zoro's hand, a silent but unmistakable warning. Doflamingo's reign was nearing its end. Through fierce battles, sharp strategy, and the burning presence of that sword, Zoro became a central figure in the fall of Dressrosa's tyrant. The legend of the swordsman wielding Gall D. Rogers' blade was only beginning, and the entire island could feel the impact of his growing power. When the Thousand Sunny finally reached the mysterious island of Zoo, hidden on the back of that colossal elephant, the Straw Hats could hardly imagine they'd be welcomed by such a unique people, tied to stories from forgotten eras. The Mink's proud and brave warriors were known for their fierce loyalty, honor, and deep respect for the legends of the sea, especially the figures who had defined the era of the great pirates. Among them, of course, was Gall D. Roger. As Zoro walked with Roger's legendary sword at his waist, he immediately drew the Mink's attention. It was as if a flame from the past had reignited before their eyes. The shine of the blade, Zoro's calm yet commanding presence. Everything about him stirred admiration and reverence in the eyes of the furry warriors. They didn't need words to understand this man carried the spirit of Roger's era. Stories spread like wind among the Mianks. A man wielding the Pirate King's sword walked among them, a warrior who felt like a continuation of that glorious age, almost a living bridge between past and present. Zoro heard the whispers, tales of how Roger had symbolized freedom and courage across the seas, and how that sword represented more than a weapon. It held the very essence of the dream to become Pirate King. Even without setting foot on Whole Cake Island, where the dangers of Yonko Big Mom loomed large, Zoro could already feel the growing weight of the legacy he now carried. His fame was rising, and with it, his direct connection to the man who changed the world. He was no longer just the Straw Hat swordsman. He was becoming a legend, a figure feared by enemies and deeply respected by allies. During his time in Zoo, Zoro trained relentlessly, sharpening his techniques and deepening his bond with Roger's sword. Every movement was a tribute to history, an homage to the man who once wielded that blade to defy the world. And the Minks, silent witnesses, felt they were standing at the edge of something monumental, a moment that might mark the rebirth of the great pirate era. The energy radiating from Zoro, fused with the sword's power, didn't just impress the Minks, it planted seeds of hope in all who longed for a future where justice and freedom triumphed over tyranny. Even from afar, the legend of the swordsman with Roger's blade continued to grow, heading toward ever greater challenges. The arrival of the Straw Hats in Wano was already a seismic event, but when Zoro appeared with Gall D. Rogers' legendary sword at his side alongside Enma, the shock was immediate and profound. Wano, a land of ancient traditions and proud warriors, held the name of the Pirate King close to its heart, along with his bond with Kozuki Oden, the legendary samurai who stood against the world with courage and honor. When Wano's samurai laid eyes on that gleaming blade, a heavy silence swept over them. Some of the elders recognized its pattern, its energy, the aura it gave off. It wasn't just a weapon, but a relic that carried the essence of a bygone era, one that forever altered the fate of the seas. Whispers of awe and respect spread, and Zoro felt the weight of responsibility like never before. Kaido, the fearsome beast emperor, wasn't blind to this. Knowing the historical ties between Roger and Wano, and aware of the sword's legend, the Yonku's interest was immediate. To Kaido, the presence of Roger's blade was a direct threat to his reign of terror, a spark that could ignite the rebellion he feared most. The very terror of the sea now saw in Zoro, wielding that sword, an enemy who couldn't be ignored, someone capable of cutting not just flesh and bone, but the very chains of fate. But Zoro's journey in Wano wasn't met with admiration alone. Momonosuke and Hiyori, the children of Oden himself, looked at the sword with mixed emotions, surprise and doubt. To them, that relic carried their father's memory and an era deserving of sacred reverence. Zoro's possession of it might have seemed bold, maybe even disrespectful, though not intentionally so. This emotional conflict added depth to the journey, reminding us that legacy isn't just about power, but also about honor and understanding. The connection between Roger's sword and Enma Wano's other legendary blade was something few could fully grasp, but Zoro felt it in his very bones. The two swords seemed to resonate with each other, reacting uniquely to Zoro's haki, especially his armament and conqueror's haki. This rare synergy not only amplified Zoro's power, but elevated him to an almost mythical level, as if he were a reincarnation of Roger's style, will, and strength, even without a drop of shared blood. When the final showdown against Kaido finally erupted, Roger's sword shone with an intensity never seen before. Every slash from Zoro seemed to tear rifts in the very air, striking the Emperor with a depth and power beyond the ordinary. The impact of his blows left Kaido stunned, an incredible feat coming from an almost invincible being. The blade carried not only physical strength, but also the indomitable spirit of the Pirate King, a legacy that seemed to be reborn in Zoro at that decisive moment. As the battle raged on, the samurai of Wano began to see Zoro not just as an ally, but as a true guardian of Odin and Roger's heritage. Slowly, Momonosuke and Hiyori started to understand that the young swordsman didn't want to replace or disrespect them, but to honor and carry forward the dream of freedom and justice their parents had fought so hard to protect. Roger's sword, then, was more than just a weapon. It was the link connecting past, present, and future, a symbol of the fight against tyranny and the unbreakable will to move forward no matter the cost. With it, Zoro didn't just cut down his enemies, he also severed the chains that bound the fate of Wano and the pirate world. As the dust settled after the titanic battle in Wano, the image of Zoro wielding Gol D. Roger's sword was etched into the memory of everyone present. The blade that once cut through seas and defied the impossible now rested in the hands of a swordsman who had proven worthy of its power and history. The impact of that weapon went beyond any fight. It was a symbol of change, a living promise that the pirate world would never be the same. Zoro's fame spread like a storm across the seas. Old alliances were strengthened, and new ones formed around the name of the swordsman, who not only fought with exceptional skill, but carried the flame and legacy of the Pirate King. Roger's sword at his side made enemies hesitate and gave hope to allies, for it represented more than a weapon. It was the will of an impossible dream. But what truly changed was how Zoro saw his own path. Carrying that blade was no longer just about power or fame. It was a commitment to the future, a responsibility to honor the ideals of freedom, courage, and perseverance that Roger had left behind. Every slash, every battle, every challenge became an opportunity to show that he was a true successor, not by blood, but by spirit and determination. And as the seas continued to call, with new enemies rising and ancient legends awakening, Zoro knew his journey was far from over. Roger's sword was a light guiding his way, but the true power came from within the heart of a swordsman who vowed never to give up, who sought to become the best, not just for himself, but for all who believed in his dreams. The legacy of the Pirate King now had a new guardian, and the pirate world would never forget the name of the man who, with his sword and unbreakable will, cut history in two to forge a new era.